Can hear you.
Hola y muy buenas tardes. Quiero darles las bienvenidas a todos que nos acompañan hoy en esta noche en nuestro ayuntamiento virtual. Mi nombre es Jessica Bush, ayudante de la supervisora Andrea Bailey. Supervisora Bailey, tienen en esta noche un panel en asamblado de oficiales extraordinarios para hablar con nosotros sobre la protección de los residentes en el distrito del Potomac. Después de un video breve de introducción, la siguiente voz que escuchará será de la honorable Andrea Bailey. Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome everyone who is joining our town hall tonight. I am Jessica Bush, aide to Supervisor Andrea Bailey. Supervisor Bailey tonight has a wonderful panel assembled to discuss the public safety of our residents in the Potomac District. After a short introduction video, the next voice you will hear will be that of the Honorable Andrea Bailey. Have a great evening.
Well, good evening. What a pleasure to see you again this evening. I'm Supervisor Andrea Bailey here in the Potomac District on the Board of County Supervisors. It's always a pleasure to have you and the recent and ever-going conversations here in the Potomac District. But tonight, we have a special guest tonight. I'm very honored that he said yes. We have our new police chief, Chief Peter Newsham, and Chief Newsham started February 1st, excited to be here. And we just wanted to have an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation and welcome him to the Potomac District. And so I'm thankful that he said yes. We're going to talk about some of the opportunities and the things that he wants to talk about to build a relationship with our community as it relates to public safety. And so without further ado, Chief Newsham, welcome.
Well, good evening, Supervisor Bailey, and I can't tell you how pleased I am that you were the first to invite me to a town hall meeting so I can get out to meet some of the folks that live, work, and visit here in our beautiful county, Prince William County.
Yeah, I was so excited when you said yes. I know that we've had several conversations about this very moment, and so thank you for keeping your promise to me, sir. And I know you brought a little reinforcement with you this evening. So if you would, please.
Yeah, they say police officers always bring backup. So I have two special guests with me. Major Hbures is here. I'll let her introduce herself, and Captain Robinson as well. Major Hbures.
Hi, Ms. Bailey. Hi, Chief. I'm Shayna Hbures. I'm the major in charge of the operations division for the police department.
Wonderful.
And hi, good evening. I'm Captain Joe Robinson. I'm the Eastern District Commander over the Potomac District.
So Supervisor Bailey, if I can just add a little bit to that, they're being a little humble. Major Hbures has responsibility for all patrol operations in Prince William County. So she has 3 patrol districts and she has close to, I want to say 400, at least 400 officers, maybe even a little bit more than that, who patrol the community to ensure that our community is safe. They play a large role in building relationships with our community. Captain Robinson is newly promoted to the Eastern District Station, which has responsibility for Potomac. And Captain Robinson, and I think there's a question later on in the program about how he got into that position. He was not promoted by me, but from all accounts and all the leadership here at Prince William County, this is a person who has all of the skills. He has the disposition, he has the integrity, and he is a hardworking leader in policing. And he's a guy who, in my estimation, is going to be very successful in your district.
I've seen both faces, and it gives me great security in knowing that they're at the helm of Prince William's finest. And so I'm very grateful that they've joined us this evening. And I want to say that I know there's history with both of you. And so thank you for how you've kept us safe. And Chief, we're looking forward to just working with you continually. I want to say to the audience, we were very, we planned strategically to make sure that everybody's views were captured in this process. And so my staff made plans to collect your questions, to make sure that they were in order as they came in from a timestamp. And so we do have a list of questions that we'll present to the chief and to his staff. But if we don't get to your questions tonight, don't be disappointed, because they will be addressed. And so I just want the audience to know that your opinions and your input is important, not just to me as your supervisor, but also to your police chief. So please bear that in mind. So I'm going to start off with our chief. And Chief, I just want you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your story and what brings you to Prince William County.
Well, it's, my story isn't as interesting as some, but I ended up, I grew up in Massachusetts. I went to a school called the College of the Holy Cross. I got a political science degree, and what I did is I did the same thing that everybody around the country who get political science degrees do, is I came to Washington, D.C. And when I came to D.C., my intention was to get a job on Capitol Hill. At the time, the jobs up on the Hill were paying around $11,000 or $12,000 a year, and the police department was paying close to $25,000 a year. So that was back in 1988, 89. Mm-hmm. So I made a financial decision, but it's the best decision that I ever made in my life. I have had from day one until the end of my 31st year up in Washington, D.C., I've truly enjoyed this work. And one of the things I tell my young officers who join this profession is that one of the things that I'm very, very fortunate in my life to do is when I reflect back on the 31 years that I've been a police officer, I really feel like I've done something that was worthwhile. Up in Washington, D.C., we really changed our agency pretty significantly in the past 30 years. And, like most police agencies across the country, we're not deaf and we're not blind to the calls for reform. I think in the coming years, we're going to see some pretty dramatic reforms in policing. And my goal here in Prince William County is to ensure that we have a department that is going to embrace that reform. We need to have a police department that everybody who lives, works, and visits Prince William County is proud of this police department.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we do have an excellent police department. Tell me, please stretch it a little bit. Tell me more about what you're most proudest of in your law enforcement officer's position, and what you're most proudest of in your career. Stretch it a little bit for us, a little more in depth, please.
Yeah, I've been asked that question a number of times since I retired, and the answer always comes back to the same thing. The thing that I am most proud of is when I joined the police department back in 1989, the Metropolitan Police Department did not have a very good reputation. In fact, throughout the 90s, the police department was involved in a number of scandals. In 1998, the Washington Post did a series of articles about the police department in Washington, D.C., where they used excessive force more than any other agency in the country, when they were getting into shootings, the investigations were not good, that the training was bad. So all of those things were happening, and we were hearing about it. Now we were seeing it publicly. And so what we ended up doing is we called the Department of Justice to come in. The new chief did at the time, asked the Department of Justice to look at the Metropolitan Police Department. And the Department of Justice determined that the Metropolitan Police Department had a pattern and practice of using excessive force back in 1998. So what we did is we entered into a memorandum of agreement with the Department of Justice. And it took us about 8 years to really transform the police department. We went from being one of the worst police departments in the country to being one of the best with regards to being progressive in our policies, having the best training, hiring the best officers. Mm-hmm. And so of all the things that I was involved in my career, I was intimately involved in that process. But that's the thing that I'm most proud of, because we provide in Washington, D.C. a much better service to our community than we ever did. Obviously, we can continue to get better, but to be able to reflect back on that transition is something I'm extremely proud of that.
Well, you should be. I mean, that's a big deal. And when you talk about the years, I think about those years being under the leadership of Chief Ransom. Am I correct about that? Who was
That's correct. Chief Ramsey. That's right.
Yeah, he was just outstanding. And so I come from a police, and you and I have shared this. I come from a police family, and so I know when that kind of investment and those kinds of strides are made in the police department, it makes a difference also in the community and the embracing of the officer within the community. So let me flip it on you a little bit, if you don't mind. Talk to me about possibly just over the years in your career, the one thing that you may regret. And I know that's a loaded question, but it's a question from the community. So
no, but I think it is a good question. And you know, there's always things that you would like to do differently. I can tell you this one was personal for me. So, and I remember it very well. I was a newly promoted sergeant, and I worked over in the Anacostia neighborhood in Southeast Washington, D.C. And at the time I had very young children, and I may have been going to school at the time, if I remember correctly. So I was going to law school. So I was very, very busy, and this is no excuse. So what happened was I went home one night. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't listen to the radio. I was working the evening shift, went home, went to sleep, got up the next day, probably played with the kids, got in my car, and I went back to work. And when I got to work, all of the officers were standing. This is the way we used to do it back then. We're standing around the radio room waiting to get their radios. And they were in an extremely somber mood. And I said something off the cuff. I'm a brand new sergeant. I said, "What happened? Did somebody die?" And you know what? Somebody had died. One of the police officers had been killed in the line of duty the night before. So I've always regretted that I came across essentially like a jerk to the folks that I was working with. And the thing that I learned from that, and the thing that I tell my officers today is we got to stay in tune to what's going on around us. You know what I mean? Even though our lives get very busy, we got to be paying attention what's going around in the world around us, because we don't want to offend folks by not knowing what has happened in their lives.
Yeah. And Chief, I'll share with you a similar instance happened in 2015 where we had a young officer that unfortunately got killed in the line of duty. First name was Ashley, and it was our first day. And so I get it. I understand what you're saying, and that it's a jolt to the force, but a jolt to the community as well. And so I get it. I appreciate you sharing that.
So thank you, Supervisor. Thank you so much for bringing Ashley up, because I remember that very well in Washington, D.C. When she was killed. And also there were two other officers from the Prince William County Police Department that were seriously wounded. Ashley's anniversary is actually coming up this Saturday. Yes. And the police department will be holding a memorial for her family to acknowledge her service. Because one of the things we say in policing, it's one of the things we mean, when you give your life in this profession, we will never forget it. And we will never forget the families who have lost a loved one. So I thank you so much for bringing that up.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. One of the things that, sir, that I'm most proud of in serving in my role is my husband and I have been in and out of this community since the 70s, the late 70s. And I've seen it grow. And for a little joke, I told him the first time we came through, don't ever take me to Woodbridge, Virginia again, because it hadn't grown. There was not a lot here. And we came back in '89 and we had Potomac Mills, a staple in Prince William County. And then we came back in '98 and it had just blossomed. But the thing that I'm most proud of in serving in this position is I'm serving to a community that looks like the world. It's a majority minority community. It's a very diverse place to live. And that's the reason why my husband and I decided to live here, to retire here. And so one of the opportunities that I've had to work with your police force is in hopefully making suggestions and recommendations of passing on resumes of that majority minority population to come and work with the police force. So I know that that is an opportunity in terms of representation here with our force. And so with that underrepresentation, how do you plan to correct the diversity in the Prince William County Police Force? And I say that, and I ask that because I'm looking at this wonderful representation on the screen here that I'm sure you're proud of.
Very
Tell
proud.
us what's your plan to do so.
So, you're absolutely right, Supervisor Bailey. Our police department needs to reflect the community that we serve. And Prince William County is a very diverse community. And unfortunately, the Prince William County Police Department is not. One of the things, and I think you're going to hear me say this over and over again, that I'm going to be asking of our community leaders is to help us identify young people of color to be involved in this profession. What's been going on around the country, there has been a stigma that has been attached to policing. Some of that's fair, to be quite honest with you, but some of it's a little bit unfair. What I believe policing to be is I believe policing to be a service profession, like I said earlier. And I know that our young people in our communities are service-minded. Our younger generation really wants to be involved in something where they're serving our communities. And I think one of the things that's happening is that message is not getting to our young people, particularly our young people of color. I think there is some peer pressure that is discouraging some of our young people of color from joining this profession. And so what I'm going to ask community leaders around Prince William County to do is to do exactly what you've tried to do and to identify young people who are service-minded, and let's point them in the direction of the police department. And for the young people who have concerns, and some of those concerns are valid, and they think policing needs to change, I would say to them, who is better to change it than you? Come in, join this agency, be part of the reform, be part of the change, and Prince William County is going to end up being a much better place.
Yeah, I agree, Chief. One of the things in our meetings that we have talked about very openly, I might say with you, with both of us being strangers to one another, we've talked openly about the community having a part in the policing piece. And it is a service profession. And again, growing up with relatives in the police force, I'm accustomed to them coming into our homes, coming and just riding down the street, and we're knowing their names. I'm accustomed to that. And so the question that I'd like to broach right now is, do you and your staff, or are you developing the belief in the value of community oversight in your staff? What does that look like for you and your staff?
Yeah, I have to be honest with you, Supervisor. I do believe that there are a number of people in law enforcement who are concerned about community oversight. I was in an agency where we had what was called the Office of Police Complaints. And essentially it was an independent agency that had the ability to investigate police misconduct. And I had a really good relationship with the director up there, Mike Tobin, and I thought it worked really, really well. And so I think what I have to communicate to the folks that are resistant or concerned about community oversight is that it's nothing to be afraid of. If you're doing your job right, anybody should be able to look at what you're doing, and actually community oversight may validate our officers and some of the positive things that they're doing in our community. So I don't have any concerns about community oversight. I think that there are certainly some folks in our underserved communities who are extremely distrustful of the police, who need a place to go where they feel comfortable if they have a grievance with the way that they were treated by the police. So I think there is a lot of value in that. The one caution that I would say is that we need to ensure if we develop something like that, that it's fair. We got to make sure it's fair to the men and women who work here. And if it's fair and it's objective, I think it'll be a good thing.
I think I agree. It should be fair, and it should also, you should take this opportunity in terms of developing that and building relationships with community leaders so that you could get a true assessment of what the needs are in terms of that and making the final decision. I know that you've had an opportunity to meet with some of the leaders with CASA and NAACP, those type of leaders. And so I think that's value as well. I'm going to shift if you don't mind, I'm going to shift the conversation to your staff, because with Captain Robinson being my captain in my Potomac district, I know my district is very diverse. So tell me, what are some of the things that you've seen in terms of the needs there in community oversight or community policing? What are some of the things that you would like to see enhanced?
As far as the community itself, I would like to see just enhanced cooperation where we, unfortunately with COVID right now, limiting some of the activities we could do. But some of the things we're talking about in one of our other groups is like meeting at barbershops, things of that nature, and just really making that connection with the neighborhood. I know in my neighborhood in particular, I interact with folks all the time and have a good rapport with those folks. But I do realize when I drive around and realize that people don't see a lot of Black officers here in particular, and would like to engage more people to understand that we can have a working relationship and a working dialogue together, which will allow us to really police the community more effectively than what we do.
Thank you. Major Hbures, your thoughts?
I didn't share a great deal about me when we started talking this evening, but I too have lived in Prince William County since the 70s. And so I spent all of my time watching our community grow and change, and we embrace that as a police department, but as someone who has called Prince William County home for many years, all of the community engagement that our police department has actively been proactively, I should say, in the last several years to get into the community to try to reach diverse groups is very important to me. I feel, just being a female on this police department, I have a minority experience in my profession, and I can understand where coming from that perspective, how it is important to see yourself in the place that you work, see yourself in the police department that serves you. So we strive very hard to do that, and I think we're doing well, but we always have room to grow, and certainly with help from community leaders like yourself, I think that we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper now into the questions, Chief. I appreciate all of you, your candor and your willingness to dig a little bit deeper with me. And I want to talk about something that on the surface for some could be quite fearful, and that's racial inequity. And so I want to paint the picture about inherent biases and talk to me about how you plan to address the racial inequities in policing that relates to the minority communities. Chief, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. Somebody has me muted.
You're good now. You're good now.
Okay, so that's going to be a challenge for us, and we recognize that. The police department has been doing a really good job, and what we have to do on our side for this issue in particular is, first of all, we need to ensure that when we hire people that don't have biases. There are some tools out there which can assist us with identifying biases. There has to be a very thorough vetting of anybody that we bring on this police department to make sure that they don't have a hidden bias, that they, you know what I mean, that they're involved in some kind of extremist group or something like that. Another piece to bias is really training. And you have to emphasize, which Prince William County has done a pretty good job of doing, in the training arena, making everybody who's being trained understand that everybody has biases. And you need to recognize those biases, particularly when you're in the profession of policing, so that you can ensure that you don't treat people differently based off of your biases. That's the baseline for the training. It gets into a lot more detail than that, but that has to be an emphasis with your agency. Bring in people who don't have biases to the extent that you can identify them, and ensure that they're properly and regularly trained on anti-bias, on cultural sensitivity, all of the things that are going to make them better as police officers in our community. A couple other things you have to consider is you need to ensure that you have policy that weeds out anybody that you identify as using their biases in an inappropriate way. You have to have very swift and certain removal of anybody who would be involved in that type of behavior. And the reason I say that is because when anybody who wears this uniform is involved in that type of behavior, it gets attributed to all of us. We can't tolerate that in this profession at this time in our country. So it just can't happen. The last thing I will mention, and this is one of the things that I will emphasize with this police department for as long as I'm here, is that the number one thing that we need to do in policing is we need to respect our community. There are going to be people that we come across in our community that have all kinds of views. You're going to have people who are down on their luck. You're going to have people who have mental health issues, people who have substance abuse issues. There are also going to be people in our community that may try to provoke our police officers with their behavior. And regardless of the circumstance, we have to, in return, we need to be professional and be respectful in the way that we deal with them. And that's a challenge. That's something that we will, and you're looking at the leadership here on the screen, we are all committed to ensuring that we get there as a police department.
Yeah, great. I think that you are coming on the horizon at a very good time. We just recently hired a racial equity and social justice and racial equity officer in Prince William County. And so I think this is a great time in terms of us just enhancing that type of training with the police department and with all departments within the county. So I totally agree. And just respecting each other and the community. I think that's imperative. So now we're going to get into some of the questions from the community, and they may be aligned to different departments, or they may be aligned to, like this first one I'm about to ask, to the Potomac District or to the Eastern Quarter. So the first question that I have is about the Ferlazzo building. And one of our constituents says that they live in the neighboring Garfield Estates, and notice that the lines in front of the Ferlazzo building are always 10 to 20 people in all hours of the day, in excess in front of the Ferlazzo building. And they want to know what's going on. So you may or may not know, And I think that is a Captain Robinson question. It may not be, it may be someone else, but take a stab at it, please.
Okay, I think I can take a stab at this one.
Very good.
The Plaza Building has a lot of activities going on there on a regular basis. One of the things that they've been doing is they've been housing the homeless. Is one thing they've been doing, and when they do that, like the building opens up at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and lines will form well before 3 o'clock, and you may get up to 50 people standing out there waiting to enter and get checked in for bedding for the evening. So that's one of the activities you have going on over there. But in addition, they also have, now I'm not familiar with pickleball. I play a lot of sports in my life. Pickleball is not one of them. However, it seems to be very popular, so maybe I should check it out. But there are quite a few people who anywhere between 8 o'clock and 5 o'clock and 8 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the evening who line up to get an opportunity to play pickleball. And sometimes I pass by and the courts have been quite full. So those people have to wait to get their court assignments and things like that. So sometimes there are lines waiting for that, especially earlier in the day. In addition to those things, when you have the homeless going in to the shelter for the evening, those that are smokers are given an opportunity to go outside and take a smoke break, which also puts a small crowd perhaps out there. They usually come out and break them down into groups. So there's not a lot of people out there at one time. But that, in addition to the normal day-to-day activities that are going on in Palazzo, you can see there's a lot of movement, and pretty much that's the reason why you see lines out in front of the building.
Yeah, great. And it's a government building, so as the community grows, you'll see more activity outside, I'm sure. And pickleball has a little bit to do with it. I'll meet you on the court sometimes because I intend to learn how to play. And they just wanted to make sure that people were getting what they needed and to understand, what the lines were about. But let's talk about this past May. And Chief, you were next door in Washington, D.C., but you were very much aware of what was going on in this past May with the protest. So talk to me about future protests and the police, the Prince William County Police, and how we intend to address it. It was out of the norm, a little bit uncomfortable for Prince William County, something that we don't normally see. But as you grow, so the community advocacy grows. And so if you could address that for me, please, I would appreciate it.
So, I think that anybody who was involved in this profession and saw what we saw happen in Minneapolis, I think that struck a nerve in all of us. I know it struck a nerve in everyone who's in this profession, and it certainly struck a nerve in our communities. And what we saw as a result of that is we saw protests across the country. And Prince William County was not immune to that. And I think that to answer your question, from the police department's perspective, what we need to do when we have protests on any issue, but particularly issues that are passionate, we need to do our very best to facilitate those First Amendment assemblies. We need to ensure that we do our best on the front end to coordinate with the organizers, to allow them to peacefully assemble, to allow for them to peacefully get their message across. And I think that needs to be our approach whenever we have First Amendment demonstrations. In 2020, we had about 1,000 First Amendment assemblies in the District of Columbia. As you know, Washington, D.C. is the place where people come from all over the country to exercise their First Amendment rights. And very few of those protests resulted in any type of police action, because our philosophy was to facilitate those in a very peaceful way. When we had difficulty is when either property was being destroyed or people were being injured. And I truly believe in the heart of hearts, when something gets to that point and people are being injured, the police department has a responsibility to intervene and to restore order. So, to answer the question, we really need to have a philosophy of facilitating First Amendment assemblies. We need to do a lot of work on the front end before we have an incident that arises passion, and we never know what that incident will be. We got to have relationships with our community so we can go to community leaders and get them involved. I was not there for the demonstration that occurred in Manassas, but my understanding is that once the community leaders got involved, it took a lot of steam and it made it a lot more of a peaceful assembly. So I think we need to do that work on the front end, because I don't think anybody on any side of any issue ever wants to see people getting injured.
Yeah, I agree, Chief. And that was true. Once our former police chief instituted a community meeting with community leaders, that dialogue began, and it became more proactive as the protests went forward. So I totally agree. And as elected officials and community leaders, that's our responsibility to partner with our police chief and the force to make sure that the First Amendment rights are respected and can be instituted. And so I know your expertise in that, coming from the Washington, D.C. area, you know what that looks like in terms of ushering us into that process. So I appreciate your response on that. I want to talk to you. We are in budget season, and about 3 years ago, I think it was 3 years, I may be a little off. I was not an elected official then, but I do remember sitting in the audience as a candidate and a community leader and watching the dais talk about body cameras and preparing to, and Major Hbures, I know you remember this, and Captain, I know you remember this, talking about body cameras and the necessity of body cameras for us to be better, have a better police force, a more fair police force, preparing the police force, So can you talk to me about that and the implementation of more body cameras? I know we have some. We're at budget season, and I know that's in the budget to talk about getting more. Talk about the relevance of that, please.
Oh, it's essential in my estimation in policing today that our officers wear the body-worn cameras. Prince William County is in a really good place with their deployment of cameras. All of the police officers, and Major Hbures can correct me if I'm wrong, under her command wear body-worn cameras, including the K-9 officers, including the officers that ride on the motors, including all of the patrol officers. So the police officers in the Prince William County Police Department who are the most likely to have contact with our community are wearing the cameras. And in my opinion, they are invaluable in that they give an objective accounting of what occurred, not only on critical incidents, but also on other incidents. So, for example, if somebody feels like they've been mistreated by the police, we should have a video record of that to validate that complaint. And that is a way to hold folks accountable. You know what I mean? And it really kind of reemphasizes the message that we have in the leadership here, is that we're not going to let police officers mistreat anyone. And having that, record of that interaction, to me, is something that is extremely beneficial. There's another piece, from my law enforcement perspective, that I like about the body-worn cameras. It can serve as a really good training tool. So if you have officers and they go into a potentially dangerous situation and they don't approach it from a tactically sound way, you can take the body-worn camera and you can go back over their actions with them. And what that will do, it improves officer safety. So those are some of the intangibles from the body-worn camera that I think that, to see that the way that you have done it here in Prince William County, the way that the board, the way that the county has, outfitted the officers with that very valuable equipment, to me is a really good sign.
Well, I agree with you. And that kind of, it goes into the next question too, that provides checks and balances for everyone in that regard, to protect citizens, not to protect citizens and to protect the police. So I think that's a part of the checks and balances. And then the other thing, if you could just kind of give me your views, because this is another thing we talked about, the co-responder provision. That's a check and balance as well when you're dealing with a mental health issue. Can you kind of talk to me about that?
Yeah, I think, when we're talking about police reform, a lot of people are starting to appreciate that police officers for a very long time have been put into situations that potentially they're not properly equipped to handle. And a good example is the example of somebody who's in a mental health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, introducing a police officer into that situation can exacerbate it. And it's of no fault necessarily of the police officer. It could be the condition could be one where the person is suffering from paranoia. And when they see a figure of authority introduced into that situation, it can scare them and they will behave accordingly. So the idea behind the co-responder model is to bring people who are professionals in dealing with folks who have mental health issues, people in the medical field, so they can come out and hopefully ensure that when somebody is in crisis, that they're safely taken to a place where they can be treated. So that idea is cutting edge. It's very progressive. I think Prince William County is way ahead of the game because they've already implemented it. Mm-hmm. And I believe that in this upcoming budget, there's an opportunity to actually increase the number of co-responders on the police department. And I would advocate for that to the extent that we can make that happen, to the extent that the budget supports that. It's a good program. The other piece to the co-responder, too, that a lot of people don't see is there's a lot of outreach that those officers are going to do. So it's people who are traditionally and regularly introduced into the criminal justice system who have mental health issues. It's providing outreach to those folks so they can avail themselves of social services so that they don't get them in a position where they're breaking the law and they end up in custody. Because when you take somebody into custody who has a mental health issue, you're not solving the underlying problem. All you're doing is you're taking them to jail, you're introducing them into the criminal justice system, and guess what? When they get out, they're still going to have a mental health issue. The better approach, and I think a lot of communities, and thank God Prince William County sees it this way, the better approach is to get that person into treatment and services first. Don't introduce them into the criminal justice system and treat the root cause of the issue.
Yeah, I understand, and I agree with you. One of my appointees who is appointed to lives in my district, appointed to the Animal Advisory Committee. So we're gonna take a shift for a minute and go to the pets. He said, "I'd like to hear your thoughts on animal control in general and the new shelter in particular. Our committee invites you to attend one of the meetings soon. And the next one is in March. He has the date, so we'll make sure we get that information. But talk about animal control. Prince William County, we love our pets. So
yeah, well, I can relate to that last comment of loving your pets. I have 2 English bulldogs. They sleep with me every night. Love them to death. But the more I'm learning about animal control here in the county, the more I'm seeing how sophisticated it really is. This is a big challenge. You've got everything from, not just cats and dogs. They're dealing with, pigs and horses and cows and I've heard ferrets and all kinds of animals that, that live in this county. So my position would be the same position that I would have with Harry and Monty, who are my 2 dogs, is that we got to treat those critters humanely, regardless of their size. We got to have a system where when people have these pets, it means a lot to them. I get that from my personal experience. If a pet gets lost, we got to do everything we possibly can to return that to their owner. If a pet is in distress, then we need to make sure that we can get them out of that stress that they're in. So I guess at the end of the day, without knowing a lot about it, because I didn't deal with this in Washington, D.C., my sense is that we have to treat our animals humanely.
Well, we'll make sure that you can meet with this gentleman because he loves all pets, and he will bring you to a meeting to make sure that you can see our new facility as well. It's not far from your facility as well.
Yeah, very exciting too that you all are expanding your facility pretty dramatically. It looks like it's going to be a really awesome place.
Yeah, yeah. So here's an opportunity for you to give additional views on this piece, which is again associated with the diversity here in Prince William County. And this question is related to ICE and the process of ICE and your thoughts about that and how do we protect our citizens from ICE. So can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so I come from a police department where we were never involved for as long as I can remember in civil immigration enforcement. Prince William County Police have adopted that same mentality. And the reason that we do that in policing is because we have, as you know, Supervisor Bailey, a significant portion of our community that's Latino. And we need to ensure that those folks who live in our community feel comfortable communicating with the police. They could be the victims of crime that others in our community could be the victims of. They could be a witness to a crime. And if they're reluctant to be, or they don't trust the police department, they may not want to participate as a witness to a crime in our community. And we don't want to discourage that. There's absolutely no value in our police department being involved in civil immigration enforcement. So I would like to say to anyone in our Latino community, I was on a Spanish-speaking radio show earlier this evening, is when you see the patch that we have on our shoulders,
yes.
The Prince William County patch, and you see this uniform, this is a person that you can trust. This is a person that's going to be working to ensure that you're safe. If something happens to you or your family, please feel comfortable reporting it. And if you see something happen to someone else, please participate in that process so we can ensure that person's held accountable.
Yeah. And sir, if I may ask that question of your staff, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah. Major Hbures, if you would give comments on ICE and how you see it in the community.
Yeah. As you know, we've had a history here in Prince William County with having a policy in the past where it was that the police department participated to some extent. It was really to inquire about the citizenship of persons, but we no longer do that. And as you know, the ADC was involved until last year, also with participating to some extent in cooperation with ICE. Ever since then, that started in 2007 here under Chief Charlie Dean, and since then it has been our formal mantra as it relates to immigration. But it goes back to your earlier question also about fair and impartial policing or unbiased policing. Our mantra is for it everything that we do to be fair, reasonable, and lawful. And so we impart that to all of our employees from the first day that they're hired. And as Chief Newsham said, it's very important for us to have the community, the participation and the cooperation of the community, and that includes every person that lives in our community. It very well may be a person that we don't want them to be fearful to participate as a witness, and certainly not to report when they've been victimized. So.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes, Captain Robinson, your thoughts, please.
Yes, I pretty much mirror what the chief and Major Hbures have stated. We want our citizens to feel safe and comfortable and freely come to us when they're having issues and not in fear of being picked up and deported or something of that nature. So I definitely mirror what they're speaking to. So I really have nothing else to add to that. They state exactly my feeling on that.
So thank you both. Let's go into an area that's near and dear to the nation's hearts, and that on January 6th, it was a terrifying time for the nation at the U.S. Capitol, and so we are faced with the opportunity to address systematic racism at its highest. And we are faced with addressing combative racism and white supremacy and other forms of racial biases. And so I know, Chief, you and I have had these similar discussions even before January 6th. So I want you to talk to the community about how you feel about those kinds of systematic divisive ways as it applies to how we will protect our community from things like that.
Yeah, so this is the way that I look at it. We've seen over the last several years a lot of divisiveness in our country. The way that I view the world is that we do have, unfortunately, we have extremists in our country. And that's true and that's real. And we can't turn a blind eye to that and pretend it's not out there. But I am a firm believer that there are more people in the middle than are on the extremes. And I think we need to collectively say that we're not going to tolerate it anymore. We are not going to tolerate white supremacy. We are not going to tolerate extremist behavior. We're not going to tolerate divisiveness. It's okay to disagree with somebody. It's okay, particularly in Prince William County, where people have very strong opposing views. It's okay that we disagree. I think that we have to get back to we defend with our lives people's right to have a position on an issue, but it doesn't have to resolve in divisiveness. And one of the things I have to tell you, meeting with a number of the community leaders across Prince William County, I'm not really seeing the divisiveness, some of the divisiveness that I saw in Washington, D.C., to be quite honest with you. I do see people vehemently disagreeing on issues, but respecting the person that they disagree with. And so that's a little bit of a change for me. I didn't necessarily see that all the time in Washington, D.C. So I think what you got going on here in Prince William County is good. Hopefully you'll be able to package it and sell it to some other parts of the country, where people decide, of course we're going to have some disagreements, but at the end of the day, let's find some common ground and move collectively towards that goal. And I don't know a person that I know in my life that isn't trying to move towards the goal of eradicating systemic racism in our country. So I want to get all of us together collectively and say, what can we do to ensure that this stops? How can we make this not happen anymore? I think it's going to be, it's going to be a long haul. It's not going to happen overnight. But I think if we roll up our sleeves and we take baby steps in that direction, we're going to be in a much better place.
Well, what was that?
Did you say you have pets?
No, I think it was ice. It was a little scary. But anyway, so I agree, and I'm in the boat with you, Chief, in terms of just helping us, even with taking the little baby steps. I think we need to take bigger steps, you know what I mean, towards a community even more so. To preserve the sanctity and the goodness in Prince William County in that way. So I'm in the boat with you on that one. One of the reasons why I'm in the boat with you, but that is one of the reasons why I'm in the boat with you. But let me ask you this too, because this was something we talked about in depth, and there are different opinions about this one. School resource officers. We had an incident in the past. I hate to look back in the past, but we had an incident in the past where there was an incident where the school resource officer offended a child over a carton of milk. And I know the captain and the major remember that. but we've moved past that. And I think it was a teaching moment for the school resource officer. But talk to me about your thoughts about that and how we embrace that concept. And is it necessary to embrace that concept?
I'm a big believer in the school resource officer program. We had about 100 police officers in Washington, D.C. That were in our schools. We were very, very careful to select the right people to be in those positions. I was talking about this earlier today. The people that you want in those positions are people who can stand out as mentors to our children and who can build relationships with our children.
Mm-hmm.
It really kind of it disappoints me and hurts me to hear people say that we don't want police officers interacting in a positive way with our young people. That one, after doing this thing for 31 years, that one, it's very hurtful to hear that. I understand where those thoughts are coming from, and I agree with people that young people who show up for school should not be taken off to jail because they're involved in behavior that sometimes young people are involved in. What I believe is if you're going to have a school resource officer at a school, if there's going to be an arrest, the arrest has to be a last resort, mm-hmm. and it has to be under a very extreme circumstance. By and large, when young people get involved in disciplinary issues that are quasi or technically illegal, those issues should be handed off to the school system to handle administratively. So I think that there is so much value in our young people getting to know police officers as human beings, to looking up to them as mentors, to developing a relationship with our officers. I think that value far outweighs any downsides to a school resource program. One of the things that I will do as a chief here in Prince William County is I will very, very carefully look at any arrests of children in our community to ensure that there was no other option before we took a young person into custody. I believe that when you take a young person into custody, you can change the trajectory of their life. And that's the one thing you don't want your police department to do.
Mm-hmm. I concur with that. I totally agree with that. And so I think it's in terms of the resource officers, we have to be, it's a trust thing within the schools. And so there's an opportunity there for us to just kind of learn from that. I want to go in a different direction now in terms of the hiring and maintaining, retaining the Prince William County Police and hiring new officers and administrative staff within the police department. And the direction that I want to go in that, you mentioned in the beginning of the set that Captain Robinson was endorsed by his peers, and so was Major Hbures, and I, that says a lot. Talk to me about, in terms of, what do you look for in the police officer? What do you look for in administrative staff as it relates to relating to and bringing others into the unit? Now, I know that's a loaded question, but I was trying to make it all encompassing so you can talk about your process in doing so.
So, I mean, the hiring piece is you got to bring in good people. You know what I mean? Of course, we have to bring in a diverse workforce. That's a mandate. From what I'm hearing from the community is we need to be more diverse. So that's on there. But you also have to bring in really good people. You have to bring in people who are, like I said, service-minded. You have to bring in people who are unbiased. And then what will happen is if you can properly train those folks, inspire them to do this work, then you will see people that will rise to the top in the agency, like Captain Robinson and Major Hbures have done. Good people who embrace this profession, learn as much as they can at the various levels across the agency, will rise to the top in these leadership positions. And so my philosophy in this profession has always been to inspire the people who do this work, remind them every day how important this work is, ensure that we are respecting everybody that we come across in our communities. And those type of people are just by virtue of the way that they behave and their ability to learn and their skills, they're going to rise to the top of the agency. And you have two pretty good examples of them with us here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. So do you think there should be an incentive pay of some sort for the police officer? I mean, what about that?
So this is what I tell officers all the time, is that if you're in policing, you are not going to get rich. It's just not one of those professions where that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So, incentive pay, I don't know if I'm sold on the idea of incentive pay. I do think that our officers that work here, first of all, you have a police department that has an excellent reputation. The community surveys that are done every 2 years indicate that the community holds the police department in high regard. The police department is the second largest one in the state of Virginia. Mm-hmm. So I believe that the police officers ought to be compensated with those things in mind, that they're very effective at what they do. They have they're held in high regard by the community. And they're the second biggest one in Virginia. I think the other piece to that is, if we want to attract good people here, we're going to be competing with other agencies in Northern Virginia. So we got to have a salary that's commensurate with that. But, we're not going to get rich. I just want to make sure that when we are building a police department or continuing to build a police department, that we do it in a way that we draw in the most talented people to be a part of this.
So one of the things that you and I talked about in our last meeting was summer internships within the community. And we had that back home from where I'm from. And I'd like to see that. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, they do have, I found out about this in my couple of weeks here. They do have an internship program here at Prince William County. Young people that are interested, that are in college, can apply for it online. They bring them in and they give them an experience as to what the types of professions they can pursue in policing, but also on our civilian side. They can see some of the support team that supports the work that we do at the agency. So I think that that's definitely a recruiting tool. You're going to bring young people in, they're going to take a look and they'll say, you know what, that looks like something I might want to do. The other thing which I think we need to build upon is our cadet program that we have. Mm-hmm. We have a cadet program here, and that's to target young people who just graduate from high school. And it's between the ages of 18 and 21, really, because we can hire young people with a high school degree, but unfortunately we can't hire them until they're 21 years of age. So there's a 3-year gap there where we can bring them on. We can pay them a halfway decent salary to work with us, to kind of get used to and understand what the police department does. And then we get to hire them. They get to matriculate into becoming police officers. So I think there's a lot, and you can really, I think you should target that cadet program towards young people who live in our community right now. It should, almost exclusively, it should be for young people who grew up in Prince William County and who want to be police officers here. And I say that because people who grow up in the county and are hired by us to be police officers, they're going to have a head start because they already know the community, they know the people. When we hire people from outside the county, they got to learn all those things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And, and that's their investment to stay home and to invest in home. So I'd like to see that strengthened. I'm going to go to the major and the captain. I'm going to end with you, but I have a very pointed question for them. And ma'am, I just want to ask you, what made you become a police officer? What made you stay? And what are you looking for in your career to continue?
Yes, ma'am. I did not have anyone in my family that was a police officer. I also got a political science degree in college. I did a minor in criminal justice, but I at first thought that I would join the U.S. military. And I also did not think that I would come back to Prince William County necessarily. But I have family that live in Prince William County, and I was drawn back home. And I actually did an internship in Washington, D.C. With the public defender. So one might not think that that would lead me to a career in law enforcement, but it did. I was an investigator for the public defender in Washington, D.C., and I had a love for investigative work. And so I ended up applying here and a few other places, but ultimately decided that I wanted to police in the community that I grew up in. It's been the best decision of my life. I've been with the police department for 23 years now. I run across people all the time that I grew up with, that I went to school with, that are business owners, that are leaders in the community. And it gives me great satisfaction to serve in the community that I grew up in. So that's how I landed where I'm at.
That's great. We need more of you, more women. We need more women. And
Captain,
yes. Captain, what about you?
Well, for me, different type of path. I've had a passion for law enforcement since I was a kid. I had an opportunity in elementary school to take a tour of the police station and the courthouse and the jail, which left a lasting impression on me. I also
scared straight. Scared straight.
Scared. Well, I guess you could say that. I was more fascinated than scared. But I also had the opportunity or misfortune to witness a crash involving one of my neighbors, actually, a child who was riding his bicycle. And I was with him from the time he was struck, and I stayed outside through the extrication and the medical care and the police investigation. And I must say, from that day forward, I knew this was the job that I was going to do one day. And after my 10-year military career, I started looking at police agencies. I applied around the country because I've lived around the world, so I was open to anything. I must say that the reputation of the Prince William County Police is what brought me here. I had officers from other jurisdictions who came to me and actually who lived within Prince William County but worked other places and suggested that I come here. So I did throw my application here along with other federal agencies and local agencies. And I must say that this agency for me has been everything I thought it was going to be and everything people told me it would be. And I've, enjoyed working here and very passionate about what I do, passionate about trying to make a difference. And as far as going forward in my current position, since I'm newly promoted in December, is just to continue to mentor other officers and also mentor members of the community. So that I leave a lasting legacy here in this organization that of good officers going forward and future good leaders, as well as having more deeply established connections within the community.
Well, I want to say your predecessor, Captain Fetters, told me about you before you got promoted, and I want you to know that I appreciate you keeping me informed about my community. And being my captain in the Potomac District. And so I really appreciate it. I just want to say that to you and let the community know that we can rely upon you 100%. And I appreciate the calls, no matter what time, just to let me know what's going on in the community. So I'm going to end, Chief, with you. And I'm very thankful that you came and you brought your staff with you to talk to the constituents in this district. And I know, and we've laughed about this, and you have to have a little laughter in the things in the work that you do to get through the day. And when I called you to come and visit with me, I said, I'm the one on Channel 4. I'm the one on Channel 4. And you said, I know. And I said, I want you to come and talk with me. And you said, I'll be there. And you came 2 or 3 days later. And I'm appreciative of that. And so what I want you to say to me now, talk to me now about, and then you can end however you'd like to end, and I'll close out. We talked about trust. with the community. And we talked about the things that the community had read, the county had read about you. We talked about that, and we talked about that in very detailed and in-depth terms. So I want you to talk about the level of trust that you want to build with us, the lessons learned in coming in, and where you want to go in your career with us.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to just quickly touch on a point that you made, and then I'm going to answer your question. When you were talking to Major Hbures, you mentioned the fact that we need more women in policing. I couldn't agree with you more. We need more women in policing. Young women should be in this profession. Major Hbures stands out as a leader in this profession, showing our young women what you can do in policing. So to the extent that we can share that message, let's do it loud and clear. So, for me, there's a lot of things that I could probably do in my life after I retired. But I realized very late in my career that this is something that I really wanted to do. So I want the people in your district to know that I want to be here. I completely understand the fact that I'm a stranger and that you have to get to know me. But what you see is what you get. I will remain available. I will be responsive to your requests. I don't have any problem working. I love to do it. So if you want to have communication, if you have questions, if there's something that I can ever assist you with as your chief of police, I would be happy to do it. And our baseline here, while I'm here, is going to be, and I said this to every roll call I've been in, is that we're going to respect folks. There's going to be a no tolerance policy for disrespect. And I think that as you get to know me, as you get to know these officers out here, and that the direction that we're moving in, I think you're going to have a police department that everybody can be proud of.
Thank you, Chief. We are very proud of them now, and I know in the future that will continue under your leadership. We thank you for your candor. We thank you, Major Hbures, for your appearance here tonight and just being so determined to be here, as well as Captain Robinson. I tell you, you guys are wonderful in just taking care of our community, and not just in Potomac, across the county. And so, Chief, you have inherited great men and women in this community. And so we are very grateful for them and want to offer our support in going forward and whatever is needed to protect and keep our county safe. And so thank you again for being a part of this evening. I am Supervisor Andrea Bailey, here to serve you as well as you're serving me in whatever aspect that might be. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us tonight. Thank you for your questions, and we look forward to seeing you in the Potomac District.